Hello, I'm Renee from the Bee and Bear Homestead, and I am going to be preserving some more tomatoes tonight. I'll be making a garlic marinara sauce with a boiling water bath canning recipe. So I'll show you the steps I have along the way to turn tomatoes and other garden produce into delicious sauce you can use for pasta. I'm using a recipe from the Better Homes and Gardens book, Can It. I first got the book from the library. I like to do that to try out recipes and see if I want to buy it, and then I bought it later. And the recipe is called Spicy Garlic Marinara. I have adapted it slightly to do some things in a way to make it a little bit more efficient while still following safe canning techniques. So I'll tell you the ways I've adapted it. And one of the main ways I save time with this recipe is to use a sieve. This is a tool that we were given by Kyle's grandma, Doris. I'm really grateful to have it handed down from her, and I think of her every time I use it. And it saves time because it lets you take the skins and the hard parts out of the insides of the tomatoes without having to do the whole step of blanching and putting them in cold water and removing the skins. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll show you all the ingredients and tools I'm going to use to make this recipe. Here I have all my ingredients and tools I will use to make this recipe. The recipe calls for 12 pounds of tomatoes. I've washed and cleaned my tomatoes. There's a few that I cut spots out of. As long as you get all of the bad spots out of the tomato, I have found it safe to use it. You can see some of mine still have spots, so I'm definitely going to be cutting those blemishes out before I put them in my pot. The recipe also calls for a 1/3 cup of peeled garlic. It calls for 3 to 5 fresh red cayenne or Thai chili peppers. I don't have those growing in my garden, so I use 2 jalapenos for some spiciness. I don't like it super spicy, so I'm not going to put in the seeds. And these look spicy, but they're actually not. They're Jimmy Nardello peppers. And so I'm just going to add some of those for flavor. It calls for 3 tablespoons of sugar, 3 tablespoons of salt, 2 cups of fresh basil, and a 1/2 cup of fresh parsley. And then 6 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 for each pint. So those are the ingredients, and what's lovely about this recipe is, with the exception of the garlic, I grew it all. I could probably grow garlic, but I haven't figured that out yet. Here's my tools. So I have my canning jars. This is supposed to make 6 pints. I've got the sieve I mentioned earlier that I'll use to remove the skins and cores. I've got my canning tools back there and the recipe, and I'll have the title of this book in the comments of the video. So the first step is going to be to cut up the tomatoes into large chunks and get them simmering in a stock pot. We don't have to cut them into small pieces, and we don't have to skin them because we're going to use the sieve, but I do usually remove the main part of the core and, like I said, any blemishes. And I should say, I've already washed my hands. I already washed the counter carefully, because the most important part of canning is to make sure all your surfaces are clean and all your tools that you use are clean. So I washed my sieve just now. I'll be washing my jars again before I put the ingredients in them. Just make sure you keep cleaning as you go. All right, I've got my 12 pounds of tomatoes that the recipe calls for, and I need to cut them up first to get them started reducing, because the recipe suggests that you reduce your tomato mixture for like an hour and a half to start it getting thicker. So I'm just going to cut really big chunks of my tomatoes. These are Hungarian heart tomatoes. They're my favorite. You can use them for recipes that call for like slicers, so you can use them as slicers, or you can use them as a paste type tomato, but they don't have a lot of water in them. So I just need to go ahead and get my 12 pounds of tomatoes cut up, put in my stock pot, and start simmering them. And as you can see, I'm leaving the skins on, and I'm just removing blemishes and the stem parts, and I'll feed them to my chickens. But then after they've reduced a little bit and gotten juicy, then I will run them through the sieve, and I'll add the next ingredients, the peppers, the herbs, and the garlic, and let it reduce some more. So basically I'm just splitting up that part, which is slightly different than the recipe. The recipe says for you to skin the tomatoes first, and then basically blend them up after they've reduced a little bit. But this saves a little bit of time because you don't have to blanch and remove the skins. All 12 pounds of tomatoes are cut up and in my stock pot, and they've been simmering lightly for just a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes. And this is my large stock pot. So you can see you need a pretty big pot for this recipe. And I'm just gonna let these simmer a little while until you can tell that they've sort of loosed their skins a little bit and they've released some juice. And then I will be able to easily put them through the sieve to get the skins and seeds and hard bits out of there. Meanwhile, while I let them simmer, I'm going to cut up the other ingredients that need to go in this recipe. By the way, make sure you keep your eye on the time just so you sort of have an idea of how long you've been cooking your tomatoes, since you want to reduce them quite a bit for about 1.5 hours. All right, while your tomatoes are simmering on the stove, getting their skins loose and juicing, you need to prep your garlic and your peppers that you're going to put in. So the recipe just says to mince them or to cut them in small pieces, but I like to use my food processor again to save time. So this is garlic. It's supposed to be a 1/3 cup. I overfilled my cup because it's whole cloves, so they'll be smaller once I chop them up. But also I like garlic, so it's okay if there's a little extra. And there's my peppers that I've roughly chopped. I'm just gonna pop them in my food processor. And it's pretty easy. I'll make sure there's no big pieces, but then I'll be ready to let the tomatoes cool just a little bit and then run them through the sieve. Then I'm gonna add my garlic and pepper, salt and sugar to the tomato mixture and let it reduce even more. They've been reducing already for about 45 minutes, so they'll reduce for another 45 minutes at least, probably, before I can them. All right, my tomatoes on the stove, I've let them cool off a little bit. You can see the mixture right here. So this is just tomatoes. Skins are still on and in it, and I'm gonna put it through the sieve now, which is on the stove right there, with another pot underneath of it. So you have to be careful because it's hot. Could have let them cool longer, but I'm impatient. And this is very simple. You just put some tomatoes in, squish them around. The juice is running through the sieve, but the seeds and skins, and if there's any like sort of harder spots remaining on the core, those stay in the sieve too. So now you can see here's just a bunch of seeds and tomato skins left, and you will every once in a while want to sort of scrape down the sides of your sieve. I don't need to do it right now, it's not like necessary yet, but I'm just showing the kind of good thicker part of the tomato can get stuck on the side. It'll fall off by itself too, but every once in a while I just scrape that down. And you do need to also, every couple of turns with your wooden stick, remove the seeds and skins from the inside and just put it on your scrap pile. So keep doing that until all 12 pounds of tomatoes are turned into sauce. I have gotten my tomatoes all sieved, so you can see my pot is pretty full, but it's really smooth. There's no skins left, there's no seeds left, and now it's just needs to reduce more. So it's too thin to be a satisfying pasta sauce. The recipe says to reduce it for approximately an hour and a half, but it's really just up to you and how thick you want your sauce to be. I'm adding in right now the chopped up garlic and peppers from my food processor, and the parsley and the basil you can prepare anytime, and I'll actually use my food processor to chop that up as well, but you're not supposed to put it in until the end. Well, until right before you can your sauce, just to keep the herbs fresher. So I'll just let this cook some more and clean up my kitchen and be back before it's time to can. All right, 3 hours from when I started, I think my pasta sauce is reduced down to the point where I'm happy. The recipe did say about 1.5 hours, but it's really up to you. It's going to be up to you. You have to decide how thick you want your pasta sauce and go from there with how long you reduce your tomatoes. So this is the mixture of tomatoes, peppers, garlic, salt, and sugar that's been boiling on the stove for nearly 3 hours now. So I'm going to turn it off and add the herbs I chopped up in my food processor to save time. That's a mixture of parsley and basil. And next to it, I've got my canner, my stock pot really, that I cleaned out. This is what I boiled the tomatoes in to start with. Cleaned it out. I've got my jars in there sterilized and hot, so the next step is to can my sauce in a boiling water bath. A whole video about how to do the basics of boiling water bath canning that's on this channel, how to can diced tomatoes, but I'll go over the basics briefly here again. So I've got my jars in the stock pot. They have been washed and are in simmering water right now, keeping them sterilized. I've got my canned food ready to be canned right here in the jar. I've got my tools that are all clean and my clean countertop. I did dip my I dipped my tablespoon here in the pasta sauce, but that's no problem because that is the same substance. The main goal here is to make sure that you are not touching anything dirty and then touching your canning things, because keeping your food sterilized is the most important part of boiling water bath canning. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna take my lid off my simmering pot. Use my jar lifter to take my hot sterilized jars out of the boiling water bath. And my funnel to keep my jars more tidy. Give my pasta sauce a stir. Your recipe should always indicate how much headspace you need. This recipe calls for a 1/2 inch headspace. It also says that you should put a tablespoon of lemon juice in each jar. That is to add acidity. Keeping your tomato sauce acidified when you're doing a boiling water bath canning will keep your food safe as well, or safer. So you fill your jar mostly to the top. Use your handy tool to see if you've got about a 1/2 inch of headspace. If you don't have the handy tool, lots of places sell kits. I think I found mine used at Goodwill, but it works great. Then make sure you use a clean washcloth to wipe off your rim of your jar. Put a clean lid on top. Put a ring on top. And pop it back into your simmering water. Do that for as much food as you have in your pot. I've got 6 pints of garlic marinara sauce in the canner. I'm going to wait for it to come up to a good boil, and then I'll start a timer for 35 minutes. You need to make sure that it stays boiling for that full 35 minutes. Got everything out of the pan, and I am left over with a little 1/2 pint that I'll just stick in the freezer. You should not can anything that's not a full jar. So put that in the freezer, and it'll be good for a small batch of pasta later on. So I'll let it get up to heat for just a few more moments here and set a timer for 35 minutes. It has been 35 minutes, so I'm going to turn off the heat. My jars have remained boiling the whole time, and I didn't mention before, but when you're making boiling water bath canning projects, make sure you have at least 1 inch of headspace or 1 inch of water above the top of your jar to make sure it's fully covered with the boiling water. So I'm just gonna lift my jars out of the canner. And try not to touch them. Let them sit and cool. You'll see the little depression. Well, right now it's bumped out, but when they seal, that little depression on the top of the jar will suck in, and you might hear a little ping as they seal. They don't seal immediately. They have to cool down first. That rubber on them has to cool down. And there you go. That is 6 pints of garlic marinara sauce, canned entirely from ingredients from my garden, with the exception of the garlic, but still feels pretty good. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to can garlic marinara sauce from start to finish with a boiling water bath method of canning. If you found it useful, please subscribe to our channel. I have tutorials on how to can diced tomatoes and other preservation methods, and I will be adding more all the time. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and good luck with tomato season.